Hi, I'm Max Fish, and this is episode 1 of Deconstructing the Machine. Alright, so fair warning, we're going to be talking about a Toyota Tacoma mini truck. And I know a lot of mini trucks get a bad rep in the industry, and that's fair. You guys can feel however you want to feel about mini trucks, but I think you should give them a chance here. The mini truckers tend to address their rear suspension in a very avant-garde, open canvas, let's see what kind of wild stuff we can create sort of approach. So we end up with suspension designs that are very avant-garde, very exotic compared to what you're going to see in the rest of the world. I reached out on Facebook and I asked for some photos so that I can show some examples of wild suspensions and what have been done over the past 15-20 years, and came up with this whole slew of photos that are showing right here. And we've got some pretty wild stuff. If you pause and zoom in your screen or whatever you can do, we've got bell cranks that are literally just being used to move an airbag somewhere else, just so it looks fun and makes it exciting. We got another one over here that's using torsion bars, again, so we can move a bag somewhere else besides where it could simply go. There's really no reason to do this except for fun for the sake of fun. Why not? So Project Lowlife is a first generation Tacoma. It was a personal project of Lowlife Mike's that he wanted to document in his DVD series, for those of you that are familiar with some of the videos that he'd done early on. And he wanted something that was a little bit wild for the sake of wild, but still with proper suspension design and geometry. And so when he came to us to have to ask me to do this for him, it was kind of outside of our thing, because my personal take on stuff is the KISS method, just keep it simple, stupid. But he wanted wild for the sake of wild, so we dove into this with him just to play along. Why not? Makes good DVD, right? Before we dive in, we're only going to be talking about the side view on this thing. We're not going to be dealing with the upper view really, except for from this photo, which, forgive me, this is the best photo that I could find on the internet. It ended up being just a screenshot from the DVD. I couldn't find anything better than this. I don't have anything in my archives, but you can see from this shot, it's just simply a triangulated four-link. Just ignore where the bags are placed, ignore where the shocks are placed for now. These upper links are run wide on the axle, narrow at the chassis. Triangulated four links mean you don't need a panhard bar, you don't need a Watts link, you don't need any other lateral locating device. This is it. So the very simple upper view is just triangulated four link. Here's a simple sketch right here that kind of shows the basic concept of what's happening, but that's it. That's as deep as we're going to get into this thing. So we're going to dive into the side view of this, and we're going to break it down piece by piece, simply growing on the foundation. Here we have in our sketch, you can see the upper and lower links are roughly the same length as each other, which, by the way, is not a rule. I get asked this question all the time. The upper links and the lower links do not need to be the same length. They don't have to be any percentage of each other. I've ran links that are 24 inches long on the bottom and 10 inches long on the top. Doesn't matter. So don't worry about that kind of stuff. But these ended up being closer to the same length because of where we're going to go here in a minute. The instant center ends up around the front bumper. Other than that, it's a simple four link. Medium amount of travel, enough to get the tire untucked on a body drop truck on 20-inch wheels. Pinion angle stays pretty straight. This is a really easy, simple design. From here, we could simply install an airbag kind of in a more traditional spot along the lower link right here, like this. But again, since Mike wanted something a little bit wild, this was boring, so we decided to move the bag over here and put it in front of the link, and then ran an extension off of the lower link to the bag that's at the back of the cab. The way that the lower link is now shaped would actually be technically considered a bell crank. A lot of people like to call this layout a cantilever, but it doesn't matter if we have the bag on the link like this, or if we run the bag out here. They're both cantilevers. The difference is only this one is a bell crank. A bell crank is a mechanism that takes motion that's being inputted in one direction and transfers it into a different direction. It comes from the idea of a bell, like say a bell at a hotel, where you tap the top of it and it's got a little leg inside that swings to the side and rings the bell. So it's taking that motion that's going down and it's running it to the side. So that's what we're doing here. We've got an airbag that's pushing kind of up and back on a link, and it's pushing down on the axle, creating lift. So with our bell crank here, one of the things you do have to take in consideration when building your own bell crank, if this is something that you want to do, is this lower pivot right here takes a lot of abuse. So if it's something that's a full-size pickup and you're going to run a bell crank for whatever reason, you kind of need to take in consideration larger bolts, larger bushings. A lot of load is being placed on this one part compared to if we had a bag in a more traditional spot along the lower link. Those loads aren't as great. But so we double plated the bell crank at the pivot, kind of spreading the loads out towards the end to handle all of these extra loads. Same with the tabs, also are double plated. So we didn't have to use just one thick piece. We were able to use two thinner parts. Looks nice, spreads the load out. Something else as we're discussing the bag system right here in this lower link is we've got a urethane bushing at this main pivot, and then on the axle end we actually ran a uniball. So same thing with the upper link. There's a traditional urethane bushing on the upper arm at the frame, and then on the axle side we ran a Heim joint. So on the axle side is all spherical joints, on the chassis side is all urethane joints. So it still gives a little bit of isolation from road noise and stuff like that through the urethane, but it allows the axle to have completely free movement with minimal bushing distortion that we would need in a bell crank type situation. It takes a lot of load off of that lower link, rather than if the axle's twisting and it's trying to move the bell crank around, it's also going to try and move the end of the link on the bag end around, which we don't want. We want the bag to be able to travel along its main path without being twisted out of line because the axle's yanking it around. So just in case some of you are not familiar with what motion ratio is, let's just simplify things and say along a single link that's fixed at one end, much like we have here on the frame, and then on the other end you have the axle. So let's say the axle moves 10 inches on this one end, and then if we were to install something along that link, based on where it is installed on the link, it would not have as much as 10 inches on that. For example, at the halfway point, we would only have 5 inches of total movement if we have 10 inches on the other end, or at the quarter point, like really close to the pivot point, you might only get 2.5 inches of travel while the axle's getting 10 inches of travel. It's actually a really simple bit of math. So if we've got a 30-inch long link and we install the bag at 15 inches from the pivot point, you would divide 30 by 15, which gives us 2. So the bag is in a 2-to-1 motion ratio. What happens when you put a bag or a shock, for example, under leverage like this is you lower how stiff the bag is, but you raise the amount of travel, because if the bag only has, say, 5 inches of travel, that will give us 10 inches of travel at the end of the link, but it also softens the bag up by half. It doesn't really work that way with airbags, but if it was a steel spring, the spring rate would be cut in half. So we'll go over bags and their oddities in a different video, but that's the simple math of doing a leverage or motion ratio. So with that, you know, if our bag is 15 inches here and we just simply move the bag to 15 inches on the other end of the bell crank, it's the same motion ratio. So from here, we could have very easily just installed a shock traditionally on a pair of tabs to the lower link, just like this. Again, that's boring. Mike wanted something that was more exciting, something that was better for video. So he convinced us to step up and do another Goldberg device on top of the current bell crank that was unnecessarily done just to stir people up, and it worked. I've been to car shows where people have walked up and looked at it and said, oh, that shock can't work because the upper mount and the lower mount move down and up at the same time. And yes, they're right, the upper and lower mount do move up and down at the same time, but they move at different rates. So that means while the upper mount might move just 1 or 2 inches, the lower mount's moving 6 or 7 inches. So we still get motion out of the shock, which you can see here from the video as it's cycling. The shock's still moving. So the way that we have the shock installed like this, where we have the upper mount is moving down at the same time that the lower mount is moving down, it gives us a compromised motion ratio. Unfortunately, because we got multiple points, angles, and a lot of other things on the shock, there is no easy way to calculate out the motion ratio. It's not linear. At different points of the travel, it's going to have a different motion ratio, where the bag that we talked about earlier, the motion ratio stays linear. It doesn't matter if we're 1 inch of travel off the ground or 10 inches of travel off the ground. The bag is still at a 2-to-1 motion ratio, Meanwhile, the shock has multiple things that we have to take into consideration, so it's not straightforward. So maybe it's something that gets discussed in another video. We'll see where this all goes. So before we go, I want to thank Pinstripe Chris for doing the Tacoma sketch for us. Without him, these videos would be a little bit more boring. He's also the one who did all the artwork in my book. All the sketches and stuff in this were all from him. There's a few pieces in here from Brian Stupsky as well. Thank you, Brian. But Chris did the majority of the artwork that's in this. Also, if you want to learn more about what we discussed in here with instant centers, panhard bar, Wattling, triangulated, bag placement, shock motion ratios, and all of those things, it's all covered in this book. If you want to pick one up yourself, there's a link in the description. And there'll also be a link to Chris's website in there. Don't forget to subscribe and check back for more videos. You guys have a good one. Thank you.